Welcome to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, where we will navigate being human together. We'll do this through conversations, exploring the challenges and joys of life, uncovering insights and strategies to create meaningful connections, to foster personal growth and find solace in the collective wisdom of our diverse community. Drawing from a unique blend of academic expertise and personal experiences, I will dive into the joys and complexities of aging, death, dying, grief, and body image. With a blend of humor and compassion and understanding, we will forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and unite us in our shared humanity. When we come together, the possibilities are endless. Creating Connection with me, Dr. T, starts now. Hi, welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. T, and you're listening to Creating Connection on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour as I dive into a fun and enlightening conversation with my dear friend, Ishbel. Hi, Ishbel. I'm so glad you're here. I'll introduce you. I'll read your bio really quick, and then we'll get into it. So after struggling for years with the symptoms of polycystic ovary ovarian.
Yes.
Okay, so off to a great start. Glad to have an expert on, not me. Syndrome. Ishbel went on a journey to heal herself. She first became a nutritional therapist and later did advanced training with the restorative wellness solutions, where she learned how to use gut, blood chemistry, and hormone testing. Ishbel was told by doctor after doctor that she would always suffer from infertility, chronic exhaustion, chronic pain, chronic constipation, and dramatic hormonal fluctuations. Today, Ishbel is free of the symptoms of PCOS and owns a thriving nutrition and wellness company. IshbelWELL is the name of that company, and that company is dedicated to helping men and women balance their hormones via bio-individualized four-step approach that amplifies gut health, functional testing, education, and coaching. So I am so glad you're here. You could hear me stumbling over some of the big things that you're doing. And you just, I know when we talk personally, they just trip off your tongue, and you've been living this. So I want to take you a little bit back and say, when did those symptoms start, and kind of how did you get to where you are now? I mean, I know you did a lot of your own study, but what was going on, and how many years ago about?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Teresa. It's so fun to be on your show.
Hey.
I started struggling with the symptoms of PCOS when I was still in high school, but I didn't realize at that time what was going on. Growing up, I was sick a lot. I had a lot of sinus infections. I ended up having to have sinus surgery in order to deal with those sinus infections, which we can kind of get into how all of this is related to each other. And I see these cross connections in so many of my clients, that a lot of these imbalances start at a very young age. And with me, our only option at that time when I was growing up was antibiotics, which there's been such a movement now, right? I see your face. People know now that antibiotics should only be used in the worst of circumstances, because they really do damage the beneficial flora in the gut microbiome, and that can have extensive implications on health. So growing up, because I was sick all the time, I would average about 10 to 12 rounds of antibiotics a year.
Yeah.
And so needless to say, it was not surprising then, as I look back, that I suffered from severe constipation. I mean, we're talking I had a bowel movement every 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And growing up, I didn't really think anything of it. I mean, I knew that I was really uncomfortable and I was sick
we
a
didn't
lot.
talk about it. You're not talking about it. You're not in high school going well, excuse me, but I have a lot of discomfort.
And this is one of my joys now, and one of my goals in general is can we all just talk about poop a little bit more? Because it's so important. And When people come to see me and I ask them about what's going on with their digestion, a lot of times people are surprised by that. They come to see me because they have PMS or they have endometriosis, or men who are having, hormonal issues as well, like erectile dysfunction. When I start asking them about their digestive system, they're like, why are we talking about my poop here? And and it's because we are sort of like trained, our societal conversation around health is that all of these different aspects of our health are sort of isolated, right? That
Sure.
their
And they're almost
digestion, yeah,
siloed by
yes.
specialty, right? So doctors have
Hmm.
specialties, you get put into a silo. I did not mean to talk over you. I just got really
No,
excited to say
please.
that,
No, that's
because I
right.
think that because what you're doing then is you're looking at the big picture, which shows because people are surprised by like, okay, I came to you for one thing. Why are we talking about my pop, my
What,
poo?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And this has happened a number of times where I have a new client who has no digestive symptoms whatsoever, but they have a whole host of other conditions. I just saw this recently with somebody who came in with really, really high cholesterol levels.
Okay.
And I said, we've got to test your gut simultaneously to see what's going on. And she didn't have any gut symptoms whatsoever. But once we ran a GI map on her, it was clear that she had actually pretty considerable um, different things going on with her digestive system. So, and I had another client who was struggling with severe PMS, and again, not a lot of digestive symptoms. But once we ran that GI map and took a look at what was going on her GI map, we could see clearly that there was a lot of different what we call dysbiotic bacteria. So these are like the bad guys that compete
Okay.
with the beneficial bacteria. And once we cleaned up her gut function over the course of a couple of months, her PMS symptoms started improving as well.
Isn't that
Um, and
amazing?
and that was my story. So
Okay.
I struggled with PCOS for years before it was actually diagnosed. It wasn't diagnosed until I was 28 when I wanted to have a baby with my
Okay.
partner. And I hadn't had my period for years, which is
Oh.
clearly not healthy.
Right. Right.
But some
And
women would
always
say that's
confusing.
yes. And some women would say, well, that's my dream. I would just love to not have a period anymore. And it's, for a lot of women, it's because getting their period is so painful or
Yeah.
uncomfortable, or there's so many symptoms associated with it. Um, but it's not healthy.
Yeah, and
And
especially if you're thinking about, how we use those, and know our no, I'm saying that loosely and
yeah,
with air quotes, but know our hormone cycles because, it's like, well, when can you get pregnant? So you want to have a baby, but you're not having periods. So it's like, well, what is
exactly.
happening? So did they not have the PCOS diagnosis back then, like when you were originally dealing with it, or had you not gotten to the right doctors or what, because this seems emerging, but maybe it's just in my awareness more because I know people like you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I feel very passionate about this question. Uh, in general, with women's health, and I think this could also be said about health in general, but I see this a lot with my female clients. If they don't have a disease that is quantifiable
Mm.
in that um, they're suffering from extreme pain, or they have some sort of cyst, right, that's growing into like the size of a grapefruit, right? This is super
Yeah.
common. If there isn't something super dramatic going on, frankly, the response to women's health concerns is non-existent oftentimes. And there's
Mm.
a lot of research that's just come out in the last year that's talking a lot about this, about how women are consistently uh, not offered pain relief where men are,
Mm,
where their health concerns specific to their hormones are overlooked and kind of brushed aside. And my personal opinion on this, which is not necessarily rooted in science, but more rooted in talking to client after client and also talking to doctors, is that women women's bodies are so complex. Our
mhm.
hormones are so complex, and they're actually every woman's like hormone pattern is slightly different. And so when we go to the doctor saying, "Well, you're not getting your period," well, the option is to go on birth control. But
Okay.
if you want to have a baby, clearly
Yeah.
that's not a good option.
Right. Yeah, those are mutually exclusive
Yeah,
right there.
right.
Okay.
So I think a
Oh,
lot of the problem here is that the toolbox that doctors have available to them doesn't really touch on some of these more peripheral conditions like the one that I
okay.
had. So the way that I finally was diagnosed was twofold. I got an ultrasound which showed that I had cysts on my ovaries, and then there was also a blood panel that showed that I was making too much testosterone. And those are the
Okay.
two markers for PCOS.
Okay.
But like so many people who are given a diagnosis, it's sort of like that's where the road ends. You know,
Yeah.
here
I
you
mean,
go.
in your bio, it says like you were just told by so many people that these symptoms are just kind of your lot in life. Good luck, Ishbel. Sorry you drew the short
Mm-hmm.
stick.
Yeah.
And so you heard that. And now there's many people that I know personally and professionally that would just be like, okay, yeah, a doctor, we look at that,
Yeah.
status. And a doctor told me that I have to live with this, so I'm just going to live with this. So
Mm-hmm.
where did that come from that you're like, I'm going to dive in? Because you weren't intending to make a career or,
No,
a wellness company
no,
right? Like if you
no.
went back to that 28-year-old self, it was like, okay, this is where we're going with this. But what was that, that drive? Because we didn't have like much I don't like internet or like, that self research that we can do now.
Totally. At the time when I was diagnosed, I had another business. I was a yoga and Pilates therapist that specialized in chronic pain.
Oh,
And I myself had suffered from a lot of chronic pain. I don't
okay.
hardly have any chronic pain at all anymore. But I mean, to think back on my 19-year-old self who couldn't walk because I had thrown my back out so many times.
Wow.
Had such severe back pain. I had seen over the course of even that 10-year period from the first time that I threw my back out to the time I was 28 years old, I had not only been able to heal my back pain and really recover from a lot of the chronic pain that I was experiencing, I had also then built this business around helping other people be able to
Okay.
heal their back pain and to recover from the chronic pain they were going through. And so I had already in that 10-year period had the incredible experience of watching person after person be able to
Yeah.
heal themselves really by putting the work in
Okay.
and by getting the right information. And
Yeah.
and what I learned during that period was that each of us is so unique, right?
Yeah.
There's not just one series of exercises that will heal back pain. It doesn't
Right.
work like that, right? It's
Right.
how do you spend your day? Do you sit
Mm.
at a desk or do you work a construction job? How did this pain start in the first place?
Yeah.
What aggravates it? What makes it feel better? There's just so many different factors. And so when I got diagnosed with PCOS, I sort of went into it with the same perspective that
Okay.
I just have to figure out why my body is so pissed off and give it what it wants,
Yeah.
and she'll feel better and things will start to turn around.
I
And
love that. I just want
yeah,
to pause because you've given so much great information from, chronic pain and issues starting at an early age. I work and have done a lot of research and work on the aging end. But we
Mm-hmm.
can forget, like as a society, because we might mark those things off as, like when my back went out this past summer, everyone's like, oh man, getting old, that just sucks.
No.
That's so hard. And it was interesting because I didn't think of my age with that. I thought, oh, it's,
Mm-mm.
been a lot of other factors. But then, you're 19 and throwing your
Mm-hmm.
back out, and it's like, well, we don't often pause and say and normalize, like, these things can happen across the lifespan, and we don't need to stick a label on it and do a check mark and then shove you aside, right? And so,
Exactly.
and then you talked about individuals and having, these different things of actually paying attention to what makes my body feel good. When does it flare up? Because I know I
Mm-hmm.
had a second flare up, and I'm woo adjacent or whatever. But I mean, for me, I was very aware that, oh, I was saying yes when I should be saying no. And as soon as
Yeah.
I cleaned up that situation, my
Mm-hmm.
my back felt better. And so there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different factors that go into it. So you already had this mindset. You were able to work with people, see, like, okay, if we really dig down, if we really pay attention
Mm-hmm.
to the individual, because again, you're pointing to, big, the medicine, or, Western medicine
Mm-hmm.
is kind of siloed. And it's
Mm-hmm.
also then very specific. Like, you have a back pain, I will give you this
Mm-hmm.
pill, or you will do this
Mm-hmm.
series of exercises because you go to a PT. But they're
Mm-hmm.
so under the gun, kind of busy, and they have limited amount of time. They're not able
Absolutely.
to go like, hey, talk to me about your life, and
Exactly.
have that time. So I think that there's something really beautiful in the approach that you take that is individual. And then you did this for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So then you start
Yeah.
going down the rabbit hole. Like, okay, my body, she's pissed. And
Yes.
how can I make her happy? How can I work with her? And so
Yeah.
as you were doing that, did you find your own evidence first, or did you kind of just start automatically looping people in and bringing them along for the ride?
It started with me. I think probably my number one most debilitating symptom was fatigue.
Okay.
And, to the point that I needed, 10 hours of sleep at night.
Wow.
And then I needed a 2 hour nap in the middle of the day. And I still felt tired, you know.
Yeah.
And I like talking about this because, again, people don't realize how impactful hormonal imbalances can be. Okay, when you look at the symptoms of PCOS, chronic pain is one of the symptoms. Fatigue is one of the symptoms, right? If you
Um,
look at the symptoms of endometriosis, chronic pain, joint pain is one of the
mm,
symptoms, right? Fatigue, depression. Okay. So when we start looking at the symptoms of these hormonal imbalances, you start to get a sense of like, wow, this is not just I'm not getting my period. This is
yeah.
impacting every single area of my life. And so I was at a point where I felt like my fatigue was so debilitating and my digestive issues were becoming so chronic
Mm,
that I had big dreams, right? I still have big dreams. And I
yeah.
did not see how I was going to be able to have the energy to do the things that I wanted to do with my life if I didn't get
Yeah.
this figured out. So my first step was to become a nutritional therapist. And I actually did that because in my early 20s, I had gone to see a number of different doctors trying to figure out what was going on with the constipation piece. That was
Hmm.
kind of the big ticket item. And I didn't have a lot of luck with that. And I ended up seeing this woman who was a nutritionist, but I don't even remember how I found her, frankly. I remember she was one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. She had this like glowing, immaculate skin. It was like she was glowing from the inside out.
Yeah.
And, anyways, she told me, she said, you have to stop eating gluten. And she
Hmm.
gave me all these different supplements to take. I did everything that she told me to do, and my digestive system got better.
Wow. So you were on the, I mean, well, I, I am gluten free mostly, but it can be a tough one.
Yeah.
So you did that early, like before there was, oh, here's a
Oh, yeah.
bakery that has gluten free, or here's a restaurant that's gluten friendly. Oh, and you
Oh,
were
no.
young too.
There was no gluten-free products whatsoever. And I
No.
had also been tested by a naturopath in addition to that, who had found that I had was super reactive to gluten. I've never
Okay.
actually been like tested for celiacs, but I've avoided gluten now for almost 20 years.
Okay.
So interestingly enough, when I stopped eating gluten, I stopped getting sinus infections.
Oh,
And then my digestive system improved for sure, but
okay.
there was still a lot of issues. So then
Sure.
became a nutritional therapist and realized when I started studying nutritional therapy that the woman who I had gone to see 5 or 6 years prior was actually a nutritional therapist. She is
Uh,
the one who had kind of turned the tides for me and helped me to change
oh,
my diet. And so I went through nutritional therapy school, felt so much better after that, continued to refine my diet, but also continued to have gut issues despite the fact that my diet was pristine.
okay.
Um, and when I say gut issues, I mean like I often looked like I was about 8 months pregnant.
Mm.
So things that kind of like developed over the years. Still had constipation, but now looked like I was about 8 months pregnant because I was so phenomenally bloated.
Okay.
So then that brought us to the PCOS diagnosis and figuring that all out, which rolled into me thinking, I need more information.
Yeah.
I can eat as clean as I possibly can, but it's not working. I still have all
Yes.
these gut issues. My hormones are still a wreck. So that's when I went and did more a deep dive education with restorative wellness solutions. And that's where I learned how to use a GI map, which is a
Okay.
stool test. And I learned how to run hormone panels
Okay.
and blood chemistry panels.
Ooh.
And that's when I figured out on my GI map that I had a raging candida infection.
Okay.
And then I also had a multitude of other dysbiotic bacterial strains living in my gut.
Okay, so
Um,
I do want, because this is, I think for anyone listening who, I'm hearing you say you couldn't have eaten cleaner, right? Like that
no.
is, we have this like, you can see it on Instagram, you can see it wherever, like clean eating, and then people will do it. And then if they still feel like crap, many people are going to be like, F it, this doesn't work.
Oh,
So I
100%.
so why would I restrict myself from the birthday cake, the whatever you want, because it doesn't work. And
That's
so
right.
this connection, it's actually so exciting to hear. Like I mean, we are holistic and complicated, like containers. But when
Yes.
we go like I mean, and I've talked to people who are like, I did everything right, and I still
Mm-hmm.
ended up with XYZ disease, and I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
air quotes around everything right, because I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
misnomer. We think like, okay, if we are the cleanest, if we are the thisest, then everything's going to go well. But there's then systems outside of our awareness that are at play
Mm-hmm.
that we don't know about, and they're not coming up on a standard test. And
That's
so
exactly
this
right.
GI mapping and like the blood panels, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to hear about, because I've also had, I'll just like what I've heard as I was going into perimenopause, I had a doctor go like, "Well, we don't test because your hormones are all over the place." And I was like, "Okay," and at that time I said, "Okay," and whatever. And so then I just like last week talked to my doctor, because I'd gone to a talk on menopause, and so there was people
Yeah.
talking about like how different things can be so helpful, and I made the connection that I was in perimenopause while I was in grad school. So I
Okay.
was attributing so much. I was like, because as these women are talking, I was like, oh, Oh, I had that. But I mean, I just attribute it to the stress of grad school. So they were
Yeah,
commingled. But so then
absolutely.
I had this talk, and so I'm like, I talked to my doctor. I'm like, okay, like I went to this talk. I'd really like to know, what you think about this. And she's like, well, if you're almost 2 years into menopause, because it'll be May, will be my second year without a period. And she's like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't change anything right now. And like, if it's fine, and I was like, so anyway, so I am so curious about, because I am, a story of one, but I'm sure a story of many where doctors are like saying to you, you will live with this for the rest of your life, saying to me, well, it seems like it's going fine, when I heard people going like, no, you should. Anyways, we don't have to do my own diagnosis here,
No,
but I
I
want
mean,
to share like
yeah.
how limiting that is when you're like, okay, now where do I go? Online, they're, selling a gazillion and one different patches and hormones now. What's the right one? So,
Mm-hmm.
so with
Mm-hmm.
your testing, it gets down to the
Mm-hmm.
nitty gritty, like really.
Yes. And
Okay.
hormones are a really good area for us to talk about, specifically in regards to perimenopause and menopause, because a lot of people don't realize what testing is available to them. And the reason they don't know about it is because it's not covered by health insurance.
Uh-huh.
And this is again where doctors are stuck, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of the things that they could offer are not covered. So
Right.
generally, when a doctor tests a woman's hormones, they do a blood test. If a woman is still getting her period, she'll oftentimes get two different blood tests at two different times of the month.
Okay.
Certainly, that provides valuable information. Okay?
Mm.
And a lot of doctors can do a lot with that information. However, I would argue that, especially for a woman who's still getting her period or a woman who's going into perimenopause, there are a lot of fluctuations and a lot of changes
Yeah.
that happen literally every single day. And so the hormone test that I use is a saliva test, which research is showing is actually more accurate as well than a blood test.
Okay.
And there are multiple samples that we collect over the course of an entire month. So essentially,
Oh,
what that allows us to do is map out a woman's hormonal sequence over the course of the entire month, which makes a heck of a
gotcha.
lot more sense than just taking one or two blood tests over the
Yeah.
course of the month. So, two different examples here with this, and perimenopause is such a deep and important conversation.
We could have
Again,
a whole show on that.
we could, an area of women's health truly that I get so fired up about, because I have a lot of clients who are perimenopausal. I'm not there yet, right? So I live vicariously through what they're going through.
Hmm.
And it is brutal. It's brutal for a lot
Yeah.
of women. And the traditional mindset around perimenopause is that estrogen is declining. That
Hmm.
has been the thought. But that's starting to change gratefully because, and the research is starting to show this, but I'm also seeing this in my clients' hormone tests. A lot of times their estrogen levels are through the roof.
Oh,
And it
interesting.
is sort of the body's last gasp
The
at
hurrah.
fertility. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And this is a lot of times where we see the night sweats and the hot flashes and this extreme weight gain. Okay. It's
Okay.
not uncommon for all of those symptoms to happen simultaneously. I
Okay.
have seen this a number of times where a woman is gaining weight rapidly
Right.
and she has not changed anything. And for a lot of these women, they've been clients of mine already. So
Yes.
their diets are beautiful and they're doing
Yes.
all the right things.
Which
But
is so disheartening, right? Like
oh
it's
yeah,
that again, that like, you know, it's just, yeah, demoralizing, disheartening, all of those words to be like, okay, again, I'm doing everything right, again with the air quotes, and then having
Yeah.
these experiences and then having, like the medical model saying like, well, there's nothing we can do.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Which
Mm-hmm.
which from their perspective is true. Their
Okay.
toolkit is defined by certain parameters, and my toolkit is defined by certain parameters.
Sure.
It's not my job to diagnose anyone with any kind of disease, right?
Right, right.
That's a doctor's job, right? Um, but within my toolkit, what I have are these month-long hormone tests that are
Mhm.
invaluable, especially
Yeah.
for women who are in perimenopause, or for a woman who wants to get pregnant, or for a woman who feels suicidal before she gets her period every single
Mm.
month. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and and I have so many clients who can tell this story that after a month of being on the right supports, okay, this is
Mhm.
both diet, but also I get these hormone panels in and I review them to determine exactly which supplement we need to bring in. And when I say supplement, I'm not talking about like vitamin B's and vitamin D's. Okay,
Okay.
we're not talking about a multivitamin. We're talking about supplements that specifically target estrogen per se. So if I get a hormone panel in and I see that a woman's estrogen levels are really high, what we can bring in then are supports to help to clear that estrogen. And I have before and after hormone panels to show that that indeed
Oh,
did
sure.
happen. Not to mention the fact that, you know, client who's going through perimenopause is no longer having hot flashes, is no longer
Yeah.
up for 3 hours in the middle of the night because she feels like her body's on fire, right? These
Right.
things work really well and they work really fast. And unfortunately, there's sort of a narrative about supplements in general that they're just kind of a bottomless pit of financial investment and that they
Right.
don't really do anything. And
Like
what I would argue,
Charlie has
yeah,
called it expensive pee.
yeah,
And also he's fond of, well, Charlie, but he always goes snake oil, like
totally,
whenever I want to try something. But what you're saying is that you could get specific and it doesn't have to be
exactly.
kind of like, because if I'm standing in a store, right, and like a health
Hmm.
store, I'm like,
Hmm.
well, maybe this, but maybe they interact poorly and maybe I'm doing more harm than good. And so I can see why having that definitive, like, let's focus on this thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we can shift and focus on another thing with having that detailed gut panel, with having that detailed
That's
blood
right.
work so that you aren't just throwing supplements at a wall and maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not going to work. But if you, yeah, it can be really overwhelming for the uneducated in that realm, or the lay person, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that it's impossible. And I would argue that it's impossible for a practitioner to advise their client on what supplements to take without first having these tests
I
available
love
to
it.
them. Unfortunately, symptoms are get our attention, right? We don't
Yeah.
like feeling poorly, but they can be incredibly confusing. Okay, one
Yeah.
person's hot flashes can be really high estrogen levels, and another person's hot flashes can be really low estrogen levels. I would
Yes.
argue it's often high estrogen that's causing that, but we don't want to guess, is my point.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
while vitamin B you can flush out in your urine, if you're taking a support that's meant to up your estrogen levels, it will do that.
Okay.
And it will do it quickly. And if you don't need more estrogen, you're going to start feeling really poorly really fast, right?
Okay.
So to consider these supplements as being not very effective or they don't really do that much is just not true.
It's just that we
And
don't have the information of where to target it. And we
exactly.
do a lot of, maybe self-diagnosing, or something comes across the internet feed, and you're like, okay, yes, I have these symptoms, do this for me, without really knowing
Exactly.
what's going on in the body. That
Hmm.
I like that. I like a targeted approach that feels more, I mean, so again, probably not, well, not covered by insurance. So
Hmm.
an investment, but you're
Yes,
making a financial investment into your health in a more kind of personalized way, right? Like in a,
absolutely.
so I'm not spending, hundreds of dollars over here with no effect. I'm actually saying
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm doing this and we're actually working towards a plan, and you can see a before and after. And plus you have, the testimonials. So that, I think that makes a very strong case for working with people who are doing that due diligence versus just saying, oh, you're of a certain age, here's your set that you take.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
which
And
could do more harm than good. Like we thought antibiotics were good, and we don't know. I mean, I was like, when you were telling your story, I'm like, oh my God, I was given antibiotics like they were
yeah.
candy. Like
Oh,
I
totally.
always had strep throat. Like it was,
Hmm.
anyways. Okay, fascinating. Okay, so you started
Yeah.
saying something about that.
Well, I was just going to say that this idea of bio-individual medicine, right, is is powerful. And I
Hmm.
would argue that that really is the pathway for most of us, especially those of us who kind of live on the periphery of just don't feel well, but
Yeah.
don't have cancer, don't have diabetes,
Hmm.
right? Don't have heart disease, right? Which we don't want any of those things,
Right.
clearly, right?
Yeah.
But our symptoms are not considered so severe that they're a diagnosed disease. And so, what do those people do, right? And as you were saying earlier, it's so incredibly disheartening and demoralizing and creates a level of skepticism over time that people develop where nothing works,
Hmm.
right? They've spent all this money to no avail. They're not any better,
Yeah.
right? And they're eating well, they're exercising, they're sleeping, they're taking care of themselves, and that takes work. It's a hell of a lot of work to eat well on a daily basis and to exercise
Yeah.
and to get to bed on time. So
Yeah.
you're putting all this effort forth and you don't feel any better,
Yeah.
right?
Or conversely, you're not doing those things because you're so freaking tired. You can't,
Exactly.
like it seems impossible. And then the narrative is, oh, I'm lazy. Oh, I have no willpower. Oh, I have no this. But there could be actual things going on in your
Yes.
body that are
Hmm.
contributing to that, where it's not just a matter of willpower. And as you were talking about your clients who were already working with you, eating clean and then gaining weight, that's shocking.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
then, we have all of these things where, okay, so if I'm not eating clean right now and I'm not exercising, the required amount, and then I'm gaining weight, then, I know I've worked with people and I've worked with my own self about, well, this is a me problem, right? This is
Hmm.
like if I, and then I have the narrative. Oh, if I did all of these things right,
Hmm.
then XYZ, it wouldn't be this way. And it's just wild what we do, like psychologically,
Yes.
and how we internalize, because it's not common knowledge, which is why I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And, hopefully, the people who are listening are going like, okay, maybe there's a path forward that doesn't have to feel so daunting, scary, alienating,
Hmm.
isolating, and all
Hmm.
of those things.
And you're bringing up such an important point here. I mean, we've talked about how disease can and these symptoms can develop from childhood into adulthood. We've talked about the testing. We've talked about, different paths to feeling better. But I think foundationally, the most important component to allowing all of this to actually work
Mm,
is the conversation in our own heads about
yeah.
this, right? And our society has, you know, I always like to give all of us benefit of the doubt, truly, because I think we are all really doing our best and doing the
Yeah.
best with the knowledge that we have.
Yes.
Having said that, this narrative about calories in, calories out is just wrong.
Yeah.
And it creates a society in which people who can't lose weight, no matter how few calories they eat, no matter how much they exercise, right? They then feel stuck,
Yeah.
understandably so,
Yeah.
and demonized, right?
Hmm.
And not to mention the fact that not eating enough calories and over exercising is so incredibly harmful to
Yeah.
the body as a whole.
Yeah.
And it creates this super tangled web
Hmm.
that I find for so many of my clients is very difficult to get out of. And I don't think it will surprise you or really any of your listeners, because I think most of us, most women have been touched by this to some extent. The majority of the women who come into my practice are deeply struggling with some sort of eating disorder, just
Hmm.
across the board,
Right.
right? Whether it's in their past, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's now and they're just kind of like gently balancing it, right? It's like sort of something that they've like accepted over the years,
Yeah.
right? And so when we start making changes to diet, when we start bringing in exercise of different forms, when we start talking about all these pieces, immediately what happens is that part of us that's like, I am not going on another freaking diet. I am not I am not going to abuse myself like
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
right? So it gets into this conversation of, how is food abusive and
Right.
how is it a source of love? And how do we find our way through
Mm.
that, right?
Yes.
When food has always been this thing that we have to control and that, is making
Can't
us
be
fat
trusted.
and
Yeah.
can't be trusted and we can't be trusted with it, right?
Hmm.
So, the most important thing, for people to really remember here, and if they take nothing away other than this next piece, is that when you enter into trying to understand why you feel the way that you do, where your symptoms are coming from, when you enter into wanting to lose weight, when you enter into needing to balance your hormones and help regulate the PMS that you're suffering from, when you enter into that journey, the intentionality behind it
Mm.
must be one of deeply caring and loving for yourself. Because if you go into that journey with the intention of wanting to abuse yourself,
Mm.
right? Which is
Hmm.
tricky. It's tricky to identify that for all
Hmm.
of us, right?
Yeah, so like the wholesome, I don't know if I say this right, but the Desiderata, it's like a thing, but it talks about wholesome discipline. So that's a phrase that always comes into my mind is like,
Mm,
and when I think about the work, you wouldn't, and you have a little one, like,
yeah,
if she just wanted like ice cream all day long, you'd have to say like, okay, we need to support your body. You wouldn't want to demonize ice cream, but you'd
mm-mm,
also say like, how can we support your body? Because again, these are
that's
our
right.
containers, right?
Yeah,
Like this is how we get to experience the world. This is how we get to experience like so many of the beautiful things. And so if we are coming from that position, like no relationship thrives if you're going like, you are bad and wrong and you can't be trusted and I hate the way you look. I
exactly.
mean, And so I think
Exactly.
about the relationship that you have to build as you go on. And I do like that you said journey, because it's not just,
Hmm.
it's not a one size fits all. It's not like you walk through a door and you're like, okay, yep, it is a journey. And so there's
Hmm.
patience, there's compassion, there's,
Hmm.
that beginner's mind, and, being aware of the triggers, because I know, that years ago, well, even I worked with a nutritionist at UNR, like just for my own benefit. And I
Yeah.
remember saying to her, I'm like, I know the food, I know the plate, I know the this, I know the whatever. I was like, do not talk to me about food. Like, I was absolutely
Yeah.
like, that is not where I can start, because again, it can be so triggering. So even if you don't have
Exactly.
an eating disorder, I have had disordered eating most of
Yeah.
my life. And so to
Hmm.
be able to say and be able to allow that, like, hey, body, like you said, your body was pissed, and how can you have a
Exactly.
relationship to make her happy?
That's what it is.
Yes.
That's what it is,
Yes.
right? Like if you think about a relationship in your life that you deeply treasure and works for
Mm,
you, right? Like what
hmm.
is it about that relationship that feels so fulfilling and so healing to you? More than
Yeah.
likely it's that person listens to you, right?
Yeah.
That person gives you feedback when you need it. That
Hmm.
person's there for you when you're having a hard time. That person encourages you even when you feel like you suck, right? And this journey, this healing journey, it sucks a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And if we can get out of this expectation that if we put this much effort forward, then we should see this much improvement, the body
Yes.
does not, that's not the math that the body follows.
And that's the calories in, calories out
That's
mindset,
right.
right? Like, it's like,
That's
if I
right.
do this, then X. And maybe that works on occasion, that one time you did a diet, and then your body's like, okay, and we can't go into diets right now, but like
No,
that's what we do one time, and we think, well, if I had the willpower, if I had this, but this idea of befriending or making friends with your body, and
yeah,
allowing this to be a treasured relationship, that you put
exactly.
in to your relationship with yourself, what you put into a relationship with someone that you deeply care about.
That's right. That's right. And that you fall down,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
You fall
Yes.
down and the resiliency factor in all of
Hmm.
this is huge, right?
Yeah.
I am not healed from PCOS.
Right.
Okay. I had a miscarriage a year and a half ago. I'm
Mm.
still recovering from that. It
Yeah.
really triggered my hormones in a negative way. And I need to
Right.
work that out. Right.
Yeah.
So in my head, I can choose to say, oh, none of this works.
Hmm.
All of my effort just down the drain. I
Yep.
eat so well. I take such good care of myself. And look at this.
Yeah.
Or we can respond with curiosity, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I wonder
Yeah.
what's going on and how I can support this next phase.
Well, and so you brought in grief, deep grief, you
Hmm.
brought in hormones, you brought in mindset, like, and we want to silo these things, and there's this interplay and this dance, of going like, yes, I'm in grief. And then I can see the question of like, well, I thought I healed my body so that I could
Yes,
carry another baby full term. And so we haven't even gotten into
exactly.
your, the story of having your little one. But so I'm going to pause,
Hmm.
because I want to make sure before we end that you are able to tell like people like how they can work with you, and in what ways you engage with people, and how they could get started. And then hopefully you'll come back. And we can have more
Yes,
of
I
this
would love to.
conversation. I
It's
know,
so
because I'm
much
like, I
fun.
just can't believe how fast this time is going. But so, Ishbel, if they want to go, find you,
Yeah.
what do you have to offer these days?
So I have a number of different programs. What I generally recommend to new clients is that I have a application that they can fill out and gives me a sense of what's happening with them and gives me a sense of whether or not I'll be a good fit for helping them achieve what they want to achieve. And then from there, usually do an initial consult so that we can kind of look through all of the symptoms that they're having. And I would then advise them to do a couple of different tests, most likely, depending on what's going on with their symptoms. So they're having a lot of digestive symptoms, we would go with a GI map stool test. Or if they're having a lot of hormonal symptoms, we'd probably do the GI map and a hormone panel as well. It depends on the situation, but I like to get those tests in place so then I can see what we're looking at. So then we can sit down, review the test results, and then decide what the next path looks like. And then I can give them a really clear play-by-play of what needs to happen here in order to balance these factors. So
that's and then your one-on-one work.
Yeah. So I have a gut healing program. I have a hormone healing program. And then I have smaller programs as well that run for about a month. That help people just kind of dip their toe in if they're not ready to jump into the full thing.
If they want to have that information. So when you say a gut healing program, is that something like where you have a cohort of people going through at once, or is it all one-on-one and they're opting into a gut healing or a hormone healing?
That's a good question. All of my programs have an online education component to them. I'm a very, very big proponent of education for my clients. I find that when people understand what's going on with their own physiology and also understand the mechanics of digestion, for instance, that it's helpful for them. They can start to put the pieces together and what's going on with them symptomatically, but also that education stays with them way beyond the time that we work together. So there are I have a gut healing online program that people go through. They get those education modules, and then simultaneously we have our ongoing one-on-one appointments so that we're working through each level of their protocol. And the protocol is stair-steppered. So we just kind of continue to go a little deeper as the months go on. That then culminates in resolving those digestive symptoms and expanding their diet way beyond oftentimes where it was before we started.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so everyone, her website information will be in the show description. Do reach out and learn more, because I know every time I have a conversation with you, Ish, I just learn more and more, and I feel so like seen and heard, and it's just really important, I think, that we allow people to be seen and heard for their individual experiences. Huge. So I like to leave people in the last couple minutes here. I like to leave people with action items. Is there an action item that you or two or whatever you have to share that people could, after they're done listening to this, go, I'm going to do?
Yeah, this. First thing, and we talked about how this is really the foundation of healing, is that if you have a complicated relationship with your body, start to write that out. Journaling is a powerful tool. Talk to somebody you love about that. Start kind of sussing out what's going on there, so that you're clear with yourself, so that you can start to clean up that relationship and start to come from more of that place of self-love. So that would be suggestion number one. Suggestion number two is to take 10 deep breaths before you sit down to eat your meal. Our digestive system works in a rest and digest state. So if you're super stressed out and you're working and having a fight with somebody and texting and being on social media and trying to eat your dinner, your digestive system won't be too pleased. So
get out of my house, Ish.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that. So 10 deep breaths before you are sitting down to your meal, or before you're taking your first bite. All right. I think that is very actionable. I'm going to try that myself. And I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in to Creating Connection with Dr. T. I am so grateful that you choose to spend this time with me and Ishbel. So reach out with any questions or comments or show ideas. And thank you so much for sharing my show. Join join me on the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, and 10 a.m. Pacific. And until then, take good care of yourself and others. And we'll see you back here next month. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to Creating Connection with me, Dr. T. You can join me by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays every month at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com, where we will navigate being human together. Being human means that we all have a body, and we will all experience loss, grief, and aging if we're lucky. Let's join together on this journey of exploration, support, and mutual learning. I love bringing people together, and on Creating Connection, we are a conversation away from understanding another person and, quite frankly, ourselves. For more information, visit ccwithdrt.com.